Behavior is the language of trauma. Children will show you before they tell you that they are in distress.
Thank you for joining us for our second episode, where we lift the veil around how sexual trauma affects the teenage and young adult mind, body, and spirit.
For our first 6 episodes, Elizabeth and I plan to discuss these topics generally. Most of the examples will be from our personal experience. But as we move forward within the podcast, we're going to begin to look at these topics from different angles and perspectives. But before we dive into the main topic today, please allow us a moment to introduce ourselves.
I'm Elizabeth Maria of Elizabeth Maria Unlimited.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I'm Jackie of Akashic Energy Healing.
And together, we're the hosts of Sex, Drugs, and Spirituality, where we navigate the power of personal growth and self-discovery through exploration and acceptance of our shadow selves.
Wonderful. Thank you guys all for joining us. I'm so happy and grateful to have you here again for our second episode.
Yes.
And we are going to start this episode right away. And we are going to dive into some common ways childhood sexual trauma can manifest in the teenage and young adult mind, body, and spirit. I know we touched on this last week. We really got into a bit about our personal stories, and we really now want to take that a bit further as to how these situations and the trauma that we experience has manifested in our lives as we navigated the teenage and adult years. And the first one I really want to talk about is PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD can manifest in ourselves, in our bodies, in our physical experience in so many different ways. One way that is common for most survivors is flashbacks or memories of the occurrence.
Yes.
Not so much for me in this one. I think I was really good at dissociating myself, but was that something that you experienced, Elizabeth, throughout your journey?
Absolutely. Yes. And especially when the memories really started coming back, and when I was in my mid-30s, yes, I started getting flashes of that event. Absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this next one I really resonate to, which is avoidance of intimacy or sexual relationships. And up until probably even still an issue in my life, is this avoidance. I call it dissociation. It's kind of been with me, and we touched on it on the last episode from the beginning. So I'm really just coming into the understanding of how that form of PTSD really affected my life. And I think we'll get that into a bit more of that. But
Yes.
that one really stuck out for me in my situation. Other effects are going to show up. Emotional effects can be numbness, fear, shame. There's another way that people are manifesting these experiences with just a complete loss of memory from the event, which is another thing
Yes.
that I feel like I have for the first experience anyway. And then the last thing in this kind of genre we want to touch base on is the hypersexual activities, or that's not what it was. Hold on. Hyper arousal? Is that the word?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
and
sorry, I'll cut that out.
okay.
Okay. So the next thing we want to talk about, or no, hold on. And then the last thing within this category would be hyperarousal. So easily startled, difficulty sleeping, and concentration. I know about the easily startled. You walk up behind me with quiet shoes and I scream.
Yeah.
But how do you feel about some of the other points that we talked about within the PTSD category, Elizabeth?
Well, I mean, I definitely, have that diagnosis of PTSD. And really the emotional effects, I'm thinking of mind, body, spirit. And so emotionally, the trauma affected me to where I got into a place of great guilt and shame, and held to those energies, and they really manifested in a lot of other ways because I wasn't able to really voice where it had originally come from. And so it, kind of came out like sideways, if you will, the guilt or shame in my life. And definitely, and that really the emotional numbness really goes into the idea of avoidance of intimacy for me. I feel that for a long time in my life that I did not know how to receive love. And
Mhm.
that was a huge effect from my trauma. Yes. So it all resonated with me greatly. Hmm.
I feel that too. And, I, for whatever reason, I did always know how to give love, but being willing or feeling like I was worthy to receive love. And just like you said, I did not correlate that to this event until very recently.
Right.
Um, I really thought, you know, there was something else I was missing, and wow, I really feel that the PTSD was a big one.
Yeah.
That's a big one, and not everybody attributes PTSD to, they, when you think of PTSD, you're thinking, soldiers at war and watching people, you know, be maimed or hurt. So
Of
not
course.
everybody attributes it to this. So it's nice to see that
Right.
this was the top on the list. So beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there's all forms of unfortunately, all forms of trauma have some overlapping effects, and so for those of you that are tuning in and listening, I mean, trauma, really the definition of trauma, right, is that it's whatever we've had an experience where the energy, where it knocks you into the energy of fight, flight, freeze. And that energy, if it is not released right when it happens, can turn into maladaptive coping strategies and survival techniques. And, come out as, effects such as PTSD or the next topic that I'm going to discuss, depression. And so I know that, when I was a teenager, because my the one that I remember trauma happened when I was 12. And it was like right soon after that I started writing this poetry tour all about like being in this deep blue funk, and that was my way of describing that state of sadness and emptiness that
Mhm.
I was in with my depression. And basically, because um no one heard me, no one knew where I was at on an emotional level, so I on some level went very internal and just sat in that sadness and emptiness for a really long time. And of course, tried to fill that empty void with all kinds of exterior things. Also depression doesn't always manifest as, laying in bed and feeling sorry for yourself or sadness. It can also manifest as anger, irritability, loss of any type of interest of, just like your normal activities. I know that before, my trauma that I was taking dance and flute lessons, and after I did not do any of that. Um,
Mhm.
there's, and we can go on this more when we get into eating disorders, but definitely like a shift in, how you're caring for your body physically. And, again, like depression is all about, I mean, for me, depression is about sitting in those and in an emotional state of shame, worthlessness, low self-esteem, guilt, self-worth issues. It's like being in that state on a constant level, if that makes sense. And
It does.
mhm,
And
yeah,
with especially with the self-worth, because I only recently now realized that my self-worth was directly related to the incident that happened. And everything came together once I realized that point. Like there was like a piece missing. Like I felt like they say emptiness, like I wasn't whole.
Yes.
And I
Yep.
couldn't put those two together. And I didn't realize that the way I attached to people was because of that, because it was giving me a sense of security to be, I had to be everyone's best friend. I had to be, you know, so close to people or stay close to them. And it was this fear based reaction. And I couldn't attribute the two until very recently. And this list really puts a lot more into perspective for me than I even gave myself credit for, and the
Right.
ways that it could have been affecting me, especially through childhood, because trauma at an age of 5 or younger and will affect you differently than that same trauma happening to you at age 20. And it,
Right.
as a
Absolutely.
child brain, you don't feel it the same way, or you don't have enough information to, process it
Right.
necessarily. So
It's
exactly what you said really touched base with me.
Yes, and that really goes back into, our quote at the beginning, behavior is the language of trauma, right? And so, when you don't have the words to express it, you show by your actions, by your attitudes. And I
Hmm.
had once that she said to me, and this really opened up my idea of the different states of existence. Like depression is a state of looking at the past, and anxiety is the state of looking at the future. And I know that for a long time, really, depression like right when it happened, but I quickly filled that emptiness again with exterior distractions. And then I moved quickly into, our next topic, which is anxiety. Mhm.
And I have a lot of experience with anxiety with the individuals that I have in my life, as well as myself. And once again, I didn't really realize that I was an anxious person. It it didn't resonate. Like people would talk about panic attacks or, feeling an anxiety attack, and I've never felt that. But anxiety is not just something that comes on as a wave or this immediate fear that comes over you. It really could be a constant state of feeling
Yeah.
unsettled, nervousness, restlessness, even breathing really heavily, extends your heart rate. It's this
Yeah.
constant, overwhelming, worrying feeling, and it does, and it can really sleep or seep into your sleep and your cognitive behavioral issues when you start to think of memory retention and being able to even just understand your emotions. And that's kind of what I wanted to touch on, especially when we come to anxiety, because not everybody has the same overview of how anxiety can manifest. And like
Right.
we just mentioned, there is many different ways. And it can just be that not being able to sit still energy, but it can be so much more, and it can be such a variance of that.
Absolutely, and definitely anxiety is a huge one for me. I am someone that suffered from panic attacks on and off. I mean, to the point where it would manifest as hives all over my body. I've had to, go to the hospital over some of my panic attacks. That and then this overwhelming sense of worry. Worrying for me was just part of my MO for a long time. And I also, just like you said, I never really attributed it to my anxiety, which, is attributed to that original trauma. I honestly thought that it was just like a normal state to just state of worry.
Yeah, because when something's been with you as long as you can remember thought, you your mind kind of believes like you came with it, you inherited it,
Uh,
it was there already.
yes.
And I think that really touched base with me. And now you're telling me you're having physical illness based on a mental state. breaking out in hives.
Yeah.
It's not, that's so correlated to how your body mind reacts to each other, that could happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
And so when people say that, oh, it's psychosomatic, it's not to dismiss the physical manifestation of it, but it's just to say that this is a mind body spirit issue. It's you know but yeah, absolutely. I think, for me, a wonderful quote that I learned just actually recently to help me rid myself of this energy of worrying is just praying for what you don't want. And that was
Mm-hmm.
huge game changer for me during my spiritual evolution, spiritual healing journey, which I'm very much still on and will be for the rest of this carnation. But just knowing and really leaning into my spiritual beliefs and knowings and faiths has helped me a lot with anxiety and my worry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's it all is an interplay with that original trauma, as is our.
Mm-hmm.
You want to speak any more on anxiety before we move on?
And I just really want people to understand that, emptiness or feeling empty, all of these feelings do resonate from this unable or inability to balance your emotions accordingly. And it really leaves you open to feeling this emptiness. And such as we just said, in my experience, I felt like that was always with me. So I was trying to like fill a void with, love, or, being that best friend, or having to always be involved in everything, fear of missing out on anything, always needing to, people to like me. That was another thing. It was like I had to be liked. I would, there could be 1,000 people that liked me, but I cared about the one person who didn't. And I took it so personally, like it was a personal attack on me. And it really kept me in this state of anxiety for
Yes.
years. And
Yeah.
here I am trying to counsel, people in my life about their anxiety that tended to manifest in a more typical version of what anxiety looks like. Well, I'm sitting there like pretending like I don't have any anxiety. It was a really eye-opening experience for me to kind of see the different variances that anxiety can manifest.
Right. Absolutely. Right. Because we all are on our own individual journey. And so it's going to manifest differently in everyone, really. But absolutely. Yeah. So there's definitely what am I thinking here? More of a spectrum of effects, for each general category. And as there's been a lot of discussion already about one of, I think, the biggest and can be the most detrimental effects of childhood sexual trauma, which is substance use. So these have definitely found, I mean, a high correlation, like, and it's pretty consistent between childhood sexual abuse and later dependence on alcohol and drugs. And actually, one study that I found that adults in an inpatient substance abuse detox center found that 81% of women and 69% of men reported physical childhood sexual abuse. So, they were in a detox facility to get off of drugs and alcohol. And so I know, and, we're going to move more into this with our next episode. But I know that this substance use was a huge part of my story and a huge way that I filled that emptiness that we were just discussing with exterior things. So do you want to speak on that at all, Jackie?
Yeah, and just to kind of to touch on what Elizabeth said, I agree with this 100%. I probably think that the statistics are lower than they are, just based on my own personal experience with people, clients, and friends that we've talked about this openly in depth, and 100% they are directly correlated. Not all addicts have experienced sexual trauma, but I do believe that addiction is created because of pain in some way, shape, or form, and it is the physical manifestation, I guess, of how we fill the void from that pain.
Right.
We will be getting a lot deeper into that as we move into the next 2 episodes, so I'm going to leave it there. But that is really speaking to me in a way that just wants me to send so much love to everybody that has is going through that, who's suffering from addiction, who has been traumatized and needed to fill that void. I wish I could hug every single buddy out there and just, give them the love that I didn't have and that we have now found with each other. But I mean, I hate statistics because it's a saddening number. It's a sad number, even if it is that high, or even if it is as lower than I think it is, it's still too high. But before I take us completely off track on that one, I'll head over to another way that trauma.
Can I make a?
Oh, please.
Yeah, sorry. No, sorry, not sorry. What you were saying about, how you just wanted to give everyone, that is suffering from substance use. I like to say substance use instead of addict, because addiction, I don't want to tell someone that they're an addict if that's, not what they think. But that I believe that people that are experiencing substance use disorder or whatever need love, just like you said, not admonishment. And in our culture now, it overwhelmingly is, looked at as a person blame, from a person blame perspective, and drug users are, like pariahs of society, when really it's about, again, trying to fill that void, trying to overcome too much pain that is literally trapped in the body, so sending love.
True.
Absolutely.
Love, 100% to anybody suffering. Thank you. I want to discuss eating disorders. This is a big one. It affects men and women. Let's not be stereotypical. This is not a woman's only problem. There are men who are dealing with these battles of anorexia, bulimia, binge eating.
Yes.
Or they're avoidant or restricting their food intake. One view is that eating disorders can be this dysfunctional way of a coping mechanism that allows victims to establish a sense of control over their body. And when I read this quote, I was like, it totally makes sense. I haven't myself dealt personally with binge eating. Is probably something that is one that I just love food, and I couldn't even almost stop eating at times. I would even think in my head, like, I wanted the satisfaction from eating more, that I would thought about puking just so I could eat more. But it wasn't a way to, lose weight or anything. It was just, I just wanted to, I couldn't stop eating. It was like I was addicted to continuing to eat. And now with the sense of control, knowing that that was probably the biggest attachment that came from my trauma, it puts a little bit more into perspective once I did the research for this. And it is an epidemic, especially now when body image and, society has created this perfect idea of what a woman or a man's body looks like. And we're all trying to live up into this stereotypical version of what other people believe is beautiful, or what society, Hollywood, has showed us. And it just really, that sense of control thing really kind of stuck out in my mind a lot. And not a lot of people would think of it that way, is that gives them a feeling of being control in their body in some way. At least they have this amount of control. But how do you feel on this one, hearing that, Elizabeth?
Absolutely. I feel that, restrictive eating, or, even, with restrictive eating with anorexia, And bulimia is a type of, restrictive eating, or the binge eating is kind of the opposite of that. The, I guess, excessive amount, so instead of restricting it, you're just, accessing on it. I believe that it all comes from trying to have a sense of control in your exterior world, because it's something that you can do, for yourself, because we all have to
Mhm.
eat. I think that it is highly pervasive. I have one of my family members has dealt with obesity much of her life, and I actually, the last inpatient place that I went into, they were the first ones that gave me a diagnosis of being on the eating disorder spectrum. And I had never thought about, the connection between, um, I never thought that I had an eating disorder. I did go through a small phase of bulimia when I was in my early 20s. I do know that I spent a large part of my 20s imagining getting liposuction. I was very focused on, definitely restrictive diets. I was constantly on some kind of diet for a long period of time, and to the point that when my daughter got older, she even said to me, and my God, we definitely learned so much from our children. She was like, Mom, your body issue stuff, like, it could affect me,
Well,
But
and then
I,
because
yeah, but she
we
was
don't
so.
want to be the reason our kids, and I find myself doing that too, because my dad used to make comments, and not to me. I've always been thin. I've never had to. I could binge eat forever and not gain a pound. It's just my metabolism. But my sisters are not the same. And one of the nicknames my dad had for my older sister is Big Muncher, and
Oh,
she's a larger girl. I'm like, what? Like, kind of crazy nickname is this
right,
for your kids? And the things that he would say, and me not being somebody who had to worry about it, I didn't hear it back then of as to how damaging it actually would be. But
absolutely.
now when he says it to one of my kids, I'm just like, or like, he doesn't call them big muncher, but he says, you know, some comment about food intake. It's like, no, like, that isn't
You don't.
okay to say things. It's never okay to comment on someone's body. And people do it to me all the time. And I know it's not the same thing because I'm thin, but you can skinny shame people. And,
Absolutely.
people would walk by my desk and be like, you're eating again. Again, you're eating more chips. And it's never okay to comment on somebody's body
On
ever.
body or their, yeah, and I think, I had the opposite, because I have a pretty huge ass, and I've had my ass since I was about 12 or 13, and I've been the same height since I was about 12 or 13, which is 5'9". And so I was, I looked a lot more developed, I looked older. And I have, had men comment on my ass since I was 12 years old. And
Mhm.
I took it as a negative. So it makes, it makes perfect sense that by my 20s, I was like, I just want to get rid of this fucking ass, like, I don't know, brings so much attention. I'm thankful. I'm so thankful that I was able to come to a loving understanding of my heart-shaped booty. But I went through close to 2 decades, really hating it, and it's interesting to think of, this body shame and, my restrictive eating habits throughout high school and my early 20s, how that really related back to that original trauma. It really wasn't a symptom that I looked at until, gosh, my late 30s, that this
Okay.
was
Mhm.
part of, because it starts coming out sideways in so many, if it's not healed in the body, then it just comes out in so many different ways that it's not easy to just pinpoint it straight back,
No,
so
I'm
absolutely.
still coming as we're going through this podcast, friends. I am putting new things together just by having these last few episodes with me and Elizabeth. It is still coming, more
Yeah,
awareness, more links, more understanding. I
And
thought
that's
I was ready to go when we started. And then all of a sudden we start talking and here's more. And it's just this wider understanding of healing. It's been transformational. It's been challenging, friends. Like I know it's been challenging. Um, but
it's
it's been so worth it.
Yes, it's a beautiful, challenging journey. And, and really, I mean, not only are, individuals who have experienced childhood sexual abuse more likely to have, the PTSD, the depression, the eating disorders, but also the sexual risk behavior is huge. And this is where we really began to talk a little bit last time about, the different directions that individuals can go after being sexually abused.
Mm-hmm.
It is more likely that, teenagers and young adults who have been abused, that they will engage in sexual risky behavior. And there's, of course, with sexual risky behavior, there's all types of consequences, like higher likelihood of further sexual abuse, getting pregnant, STDs, HIV, all kinds of different uh, effects of this high sex risk behavior. And I know for me, when I was a teenager, that it almost became just what I believe that that's just what you did. And it became just as normal to me as some of these other effects that, boy meets girl, boy wants girl, girl says okay. And that was what I did for
Mm-hmm.
many. And I believe that the high risk behaviors, having sex, without protection or with, multiple partners, all stemmed from a place of low self worth for myself. But it
Yep.
is that I am still unpacking in my healing journey and still working on. Yeah. So, how about you, Jackie? How is
Well, and I want to touch on this because it is, and it's very common occurrence for individuals to who have been traumatized sexually to engage in these more risque behaviors. But another way for it to manifest is complete dissociation from sex at all.
right?
And you would then, you don't at all get into situations where you are likely to need to have sex or to do that.
Right.
And in my case, it was really like that. And there was something that happened to me early on in my life. And I was probably in junior high, and we were at a party, and a friend of mine was, having regular behavior with a boy beside me and it's back in the day, nobody had couches. So as we're on blankets on the floor and we're
It,
watching movies or whatever. And she was just kissing the guy beside me. They weren't, nothing else was happening, but my body had a physical reaction. Like PTSD started, like I started shaking as if I was vibrating from my being freezing cold. In
mm,
my mind, I know she's fine. So I'm not even I'm like, what the hell's going on? Why is my body doing this? I'm not even relating it to being traumatized sexually. I just was just
well, yeah,
vibrating. And it just started like I felt fearful. I didn't know why I was scared. My mind was very aware that it was just this normal situation, and I never attributed the two until later in life as being,
right,
this fear that something bad was happening to her beside me. But that kind of, I was scared to be touched by
right,
people. Like if I couldn't even get a massage until I was 30 because I couldn't have people touch my back. Like it manifested the complete opposite way. Like, don't touch me. Any type of, especially around my neck or certain areas of my body, my stomach, I would just have like a immediate shutdown reaction where I couldn't pinpoint it to the event, but I knew it was like too much energy. Don't away, go away. It was just the shut down immediately. So that is kind of what leads into the next topic here, which would be the challenges in relationships from
yeah,
having an experience like this. It's, I mean, I'm going to list a few: trust issues, fear of intimacy, unstable relationships, high divorce rate, codependency. That's just the bare minimum
Right.
of the challenges faced with sexual trauma if you're not in a relationship with somebody who, I mean, it's like I said, I think in the last episode, if you don't understand it yourself, you're not going to be able to fully express yourself to a partner. You
Right.
don't know your needs. They don't know how to meet your needs. And it's really going to continue to cause a lot of challenges in your relationship. And I know in my experience, it has. I am currently separated. I have never had a successful relationship. My relationships were all attached based on fear and an unhealthy attachment style. It's not to say I didn't have genuine feelings or love in situations, but I was linking and attaching for the wrong reasons, and there was no possibility of a healthy relationship because I didn't have a healthy understanding of what a good relationship is.
Absolutely. And that is exactly where I was. My mom, she used to joke that I would friend zone the good guys before, like I guess they could hurt me or whatever. That was in my, but she would always say, you friends
Mhm.
all of, all your boyfriends. And I saw the pattern in that with, my own intimacy issues. This is also something that I am currently still dealing with and still learning, again, going all the way back to the beginning of this episode, learning how to, in a healthy way, receive
Mhm.
love, you
Mhm.
know. And
Well, and
well, I was going to
no,
say
I
that,
agree.
yeah, in my, teens and 20s, I was so disassociated that, okay, whatever the man wants, whatever. I've gone through other kind of carnations of this where I've gone all the way to the extent of I was completely abstinent for 6 years during that time. And this was in my 30s. During that time I could not literally talk to a man without, like, it was like I resorted back to like my 13-year-old self. And if I thought a guy was good looking, I couldn't even talk to them. I would get all like oddly like giggly and
Yeah.
weird, just run out of the room. I mean, literally, and I believe that, that, I mean, you would think that that 6 years, I did a lot of really deep work around this with my intimacy. And, they say like the idea of sexual dysfunction, like just not even wanting to have any type of, intimacy with anyone. So just that difficulty for me, I went through that of being able to feel desire for someone else, or, any kind of like emotion of connection. I had just cut myself off from all of that and really
Mhm.
felt like more of a desexualized, like preteen, like a kind of, and it took me 6 years of pretty deep work before I was able to be intimate again. And even when I did go back out, I immediately attracted some pretty challenging relationships. So
Mhm.
it is, it has been, and I don't believe it has to be a long process for everyone. It just depends on, and there's been so many strides in the mental health community and the holistic health, healing health community, that, when a child or a teenager or a young adult, or anyone really, goes through this type of trauma, there are so many more solutions and people are talking about it more than when we were kids. And so I'm thankful for that. Hopefully people can begin to heal from these just, I mean, horrendous freaking effects in a quicker way than I had to.
I
Yeah.
kind of feel like I'm in the same boat with you. Like I had to go the hard way because I have this weird way of learning that it takes me about 3 times to get the message. Not so much anymore, but it did. And I had like the way I learn anything in life is by doing. I am not that kid in school that somebody can show you something and then tell you to do it and you're going to do it. No, come sit with me. Let's run through it one time and then I'll never forget. Like I have to go through the process and then I know. And that's
Experience.
just way it is for me and how I learn. But I mean, that's the point of the show. We didn't come on the show and decide to bear our entire childhood trauma with you guys if we don't know for a fact that open communication and transparency about these situations is the only way to bring the awareness you need in order to heal. So we are so in depth with what our story is and the understanding around the traumas and the learning experiences for hopefully the benefit of helping somebody else in the same situation. So maybe they don't have to spend as much time trying to figure it out and they can really start to bring awareness to their own struggles. And that's the hope here. And really that's the hope that we can provide, that if you have teenagers or if you have young adults in your house and they have struggled with
Yes.
childhood sexual trauma, there are ways that we can help them. There are different healing
Yes.
modalities and alternative healing methods that we want to kind of get into now that will just allow us to hold space for these young people and listen to them without judgment. That's key. That's the number one. I'm only going to say two myself, but that is the number one, is allowing the freedom for someone to express their story and just holding space with them without, your adult, your logical mind coming in that need to help other people or need to be a solution for other people. A lot of times people just need somebody to listen. And if
Yes.
you can be that person, hold your comment until they ask you for it. If they didn't ask, just be there for them. It
Mm.
can be uncomfortable. It's not always easy to walk somebody through their trauma, but you can be a huge support just by being that open ear. So that is number one in my mind, and really would be to try and look, if you want to take that to the next level, there are structured holistic treatments that aim to help integrate physical and a mental and emotional well-being by using different spiritual modalities. So if
Yes.
you're not, already within a different group or you're searching or looking for alternative methods, please do take that into consideration as you move forward in that journey.
Absolutely. And I believe that structured holistic treatment centers, there's a lot more of them now than there were, back in the 80s. And
Mhm.
so, absolutely, and one of the ways that I have healed my mind, body, and spirit, and I actually started my journey with herbology in my early 20s. I started taking classes on herbology. And this my food journey kind of goes in with my healing journey. I became a vegetarian very young, and then but I didn't know anything about vegetables really, so I just ate like pizza and all through all through my teen years. But then in like pizza and freaking cheese and bean burritos. But then in my early adult life, I started learning about herbology and moving away from pharmaceuticals. So I wanted to discuss just briefly, that if you, just like Jackie said, if you have teens in the house or you're a teen yourself, try herbology instead of pharmaceuticals. During my research, I found a wonderful grassroots community organization in Tallahassee, Florida. It's called Weeds and Deeds. They're an outreach organization, and they help young people and community members heal from traumatic effects using herbal healing. And so they say herbs can serve as powerful allies in the process of healing from sexual violence. And they go on to explain that many of the symptoms of trauma, like anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, can be minimized by using herbology. So, just as a beginning discussion, guys, and we'll go on and really unpack, herbal healing modalities when we get into the spiritual side of things in our podcast. But just a couple herbs that you may want to try out if you are someone that is, dealing with the effects of trauma. One is chamomile, and chamomile is an herb that, it's a very popular herb, and I believe it's underrated because of its popularity. Like, people don't really consider the holistic healing qualities in chamomile. But chamomile can help improve cardiovascular conditions, stimulate the immune system, lower inflammation, it calms anxiety, and promote sleep. So it's an excellent herb to use, as well as lavender. Lavender is an excellent herb for relaxation, and and also there's a lot of research around lavender in regards to helping anxiety, depression, insomnia. So, and I also know that St. John's worts is another one. But do begin, if pharmaceuticals are not working for you, begin to look into some alternative ways to heal, because it's a mind, body, spirit deal, this healing journey. And so focusing on the body is very important. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you for your expertise in that matter. One thing I found when I was looking for some alternative therapies, and it's really the basis of my work through the energy healing I do in the Akashic Records, is cognitive behavioral therapy. And it is really taken deeper roots over the last few years, especially when we come and start talking about addiction. And I'll touch a lot more on this when we get into the next couple of episodes. But really, the focus of it is reprogramming pathways in our brain, with the belief that every negative behavior or every experience and trauma, it's a ingrained behavior that has been done through repetition or continuous usage. So we can retrain that by reprogramming those pathways with more positive behaviors. And it's so in depth, and I wouldn't that brief description probably doesn't give you everything. Right. I'd love to tell you about it, but it's really going to get a lot more into our story when we talk about the drug addiction and some of the treatments that we used throughout that part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you, Jackie, for talking about some of the, the different therapies that are out there now. I actually have not, I think that I might have been introduced to cognitive behavioral therapy in an outpatient center that I was in. But I didn't complete it. So, but one type of therapy that has worked for me consistently is just group therapy. And group, so especially when I was a teenager, I actually went to some group therapies with other teens, and those are the memories that, like, I remember feeling a connection just by knowing that there are other people out there that were going through some similar things. And these group therapies were based more on staying clean and not doing drugs and stuff like that. But so, and it's interesting because these are all effects of for children that have been traumatized. But most of the group therapies that I did as a teenager did not focus on trauma. It was just focusing on the effects of the trauma, with substance abuse. Mm-hmm. But now there are groups where, and I am a proponent for solution-based spiritual modalities. And so, I actually use group therapy with, in my spiritual practice, to do scripting, to focus on, group upliftment. And there's so much evidence and research out there about the power of the group dynamic. And so, if you're someone that is out there struggling right now, I encourage you to find, either online or in person, a group therapy that is focusing on solution-based modalities. Because if you're just sitting in a group, rehashing your trauma over and
I
over.
was going to say, I
Mhm.
honestly was going to say before you said that, because I did go to a group, and I was going to let people be mindful that they're not all groups are for you. And
Right.
it is important to find that, because the group that I was in, I honestly was in the early stages of my recovery. It was an outpatient program, and only been sober for about a month. And the guy is telling me his whole life story about waking up and all these drugs, and we're right downtown, and people are using drugs outside. It
Right.
was not the right place for me at that time. Not to say that somebody there might not be benefiting from that, but that was more of a trigger for me in that sense. And it wasn't something I continued with at that group. It was not for me, but I did find a group after the
Yeah.
fact that was more, like you said, a solution based, more not just exactly rehashing binge or drug stories, that was going to take me right back to where I finally just got out of. So,
Solution based.
thank you for saying that. The solution based therapy.
Yes. Yes.
Beautiful.
That,
Thank you, Elizabeth. And these are just a few. Don't limit yourself to, ideas, or, there is so many different ways of healing. And when we're trying to touch on as much as we can um, within our podcast here, but really there is unlimited resources out there these days for solution-based healing, as Elizabeth said.
yes, and absolutely. And I just wanted to reiterate what Jackie said about, when you go, this is when you're finding, a therapist, or finding a group to work with, or a coach, or any type of individual, you are going to interview them to see if it's a good fit. And, I would say give it a couple sessions just to see. But, if it's not vibing with you, if you're not feeling it,
Mm-hmm.
then there are thousands of practitioners out there and
Yeah,
groups that definitely focus on solution based holistic healing.
I love it. Thank you.
Yes.
Great. So I think we are kind of going to wrap up today, and then we like to kind of wrap up each one of our shows with a little bit more Q&A for myself and Elizabeth, and we'll do a little back and forth, and just to kind of allow you guys a little bit more information into our story, so that you can understand really the journey that brought us to this point. So I'll go ahead and I'll start with you, Elizabeth, if you don't
Okay.
mind.
Okay. No worries.
um, I guess my first question was, did you confide anybody about the experience that you have that happened to you when you were 12?
Yes, I did. Ooh, I'm feeling some energy move through me. But I was spending the night at a friend of mine's house, and her mother, I guess, thought that it would be cute to get us drunk. I was 12. And so she gave us gin. Then after that, she took us to a bar. And then I left with two men. In retrospect, I believe that I was sold to those two men. And I basically woke up the next morning in a patch of kudzu on the side of a road. And I got up, I got myself dressed, and talk about this being the first, this was the first experience that I had that I was like, okay, I'm survivor. This is, and so I got dressed and I walked back over to my friend's house, and they brought me. I mean, I told them, I told my mom, a missing report had already been filed. um the cops actually came to my mom's house and asked some questions, and then everything after that day was swept under the rug. It was never brought up again.
I'm so sorry, Elizabeth. I mean, even just I've heard it, we've talked about this before, but hearing it now, I don't know, it had this really heavy effect. Um, I'm so sorry that you ever. I'm just so sorry. We're not
It's
together, guys, in the studio together. Unfortunately, I can't
yeah,
even reach out and give my best friend a hug in this time where you know she was vulnerable enough to say that. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I'm
you're
so
welcome.
sorry. And to have the courage to even be that vulnerable. We're so grateful for you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I don't know really if it's vulnerability or I'm still working through disassociation with it. I will also say that laughter is a way that I have historically dealt with difficult topics. And, I guess for a long time, when I started having memories again about this experience, that it was almost, and I believe that the mind protects the psyche, the energy in any way that it can. And for me, um, all of the memories and whatnot really have come through more like a movie reel, honestly.
Okay.
And then also with the amount of spiritual healing that I have gone through, and getting to this place in my life where I fully believe that all experiences that I have gone through in this realm have happened for me. That I am in a place of a lot more acceptance of what occurred so long ago. So I am thankful that I was able to share that, just in the hopes that someone else, because speaking it does it helps to dissipate the negatively charged energy around it. I mean, and
Mhm.
again, not to say that, you just, blatantly just go around telling everyone your business, but, in the regards of this podcast, I believe that it's, for the betterment of everyone to be able to hear the hard truths about my experience. And, hopefully they don't have to go through what I did with the amount of years it took me before I was able to process that experience. Um, so
Thank
for
you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Did you confide in anyone about your trauma?
Um, I did later in life. Um, so I think the first person I told was a friend. Um, I mean, kind of to touch back on what we talked about last time, guys. The incident that I remember took place probably about five. Come to find out, it had probably been going on prior to that without conscious awareness. But I mentioned it to a girlfriend in high school, and that was it. I didn't tell my parents at all until my adult life. I was probably about 28. And the only reason I told my dad is that my sister had ran into the guy's wife at the hospital and
Mm,
kind of reopened up that connection. And my dad was talking about heading out to visit them again. And then I decided to tell him at that point what happened. Um,
wow.
not to, and he's a really aggressive guy. He's very quiet with his emotions. I knew it affected him, but we never talked about it again after that. He never went out and started out that relationship again, obviously. But yeah, like, I mean, it was heard, but it wasn't, there was like, what was he going to do? Like, he shut down immediately. And I had already long dissociated from the story. Even when I told my friend, I was dissociated from it. Like you said, I honestly remember the movie that was playing while it happened. And now when I would repeat the story, it was like a movie. I never felt anything about it. Like, I
Right.
didn't think it even traumatized me. I didn't think that any of my problems came from that incident. Like, I
Right.
felt like, in my mind, I actually wanted, because the guy has his own company. And I'm like kind of hard up for money, my life. And really had started to directly relate my value based on how much money I had or the clothes I was wearing as I formed those teenage years. And I almost like just wanted to like blackmail the guy. That's
Mm,
the reaction I had. It was like I didn't even care. I just wanted to like show up and be like, give me money. And
right.
I
Wow.
then I felt really shameful about, why is that my reaction? Why would that be the first thing that came to my mind? So I was really, really shameful about that as well, because that's not in my mind. It wasn't a normal response. Through the research we've done, it comes out it is a very normal response, but I didn't see that at the time. But thankfully, I had some really amazing friends that actually heard me, and they were very gracious to hear the story, but they weren't able to help me
Right.
process the trauma, either.
Right.
So,
I told several people, and I actually had people um tell me that I was lying, I mean, like friends of mine, it was and I
well, and
think
this is why I honestly believe our when we talked about that nun and the host situation last episode, that is why I believe we went those different directions. Here you are speaking out about an incident and nobody's listening. So your behavior takes these really drastic turns. And it's like, hear me now? Do you hear me
right.
now? The by action, and for me not saying anything, and then all of a sudden I can't even be touched
You
by a massage lady because I've been just like went the total, and I can see how the variance after we discuss this in depth of the way our teenage years kind of formated in different directions, but you know, still that
similar
dissociation was the main thing that we were both doing consistently.
is that we weren't, yeah, and really, I mean, and that was a pattern that happened to me over and over again, that I would attempt to speak my truth around my sexual trauma. And I also wanted to say that, going back to the sexual risky behavior, that I found myself as a teenager and a young adult putting myself in more and more risky situations. And so I am someone who has experienced further sexual abuse, because of, it's almost like trying to reenact and change the scenario
Mm-hmm.
time.
So, do you think you experienced that was like the physical trigger that was directly related to that experience, and that's how, was that like a triggering, like being not being heard would be a triggering experience that would then you would immediately kind of go out and create an experience where I guess
Maybe I would
maybe
be hurt this time, right?
yeah.
So it's like, it was a pattern that developed over. And yeah, Jackie, I feel that you hit it right on the nail, that based on my truth not being heard over and over, I would speak it, and people would either tell me I was lying or ignore
Mm-hmm.
me, or I'm sorry that happened, let's sweep it under the rug, everything is okay, la la,
Mm-hmm.
now,
It all
no,
makes sense. And then here I am saying nothing. And now my life, I have to control every aspect
right,
because, that's all I have, right? It's so,
it's
I mean, it really is so related to, I just, I guess I'm still shocked by how that one incident affected so many things. And I
every
guess I really just have one last question for you, which was, how
yes.
did you cope besides the risque behavior?
Well, and this is, I mean, literally within 6 months, because the same year that I experienced that sexual trauma, I also lost my father the same year.
I'm so
And
sorry.
so within 6 months, I was so deep into alcohol and drug experimentation that I was like bringing Mad Dog 2020 in my backpack, and I was in middle school. So I went from, a little sweet flute playing Afro girl, very awkward, whatever, to literally like a complete delinquent,
Mhm.
bringing, and I say that loosely because I wasn't a delinquent. I was, screaming for help. And I mean, and
Mhm.
it still amazes me that no one put the two and two together, even after I'm saying it, like
Mhm. Yeah.
traumatized me. I'm 12, 13 years old and I'm acting out, taking handfuls of LSD and bringing alcohol
Mhm.
to, to middle school. I mean, I got to the point where I would just walk straight out the front door and just, the principal would be like, "Where are you going?" And I just turn around and flicker off and keep on walking. It
Yeah.
out of control. I was out of control. And still, and then it just started being, oh, well, she's a delinquent. You just need to lock her up and
Mhm.
throw her in the key, because without ever looking at, okay, how was she before? It's kind of
Yeah,
odd.
like, did something just
Before,
happen? Or little Elizabeth
right?
completely changed her personality?
I know.
And that's what I mean about our parents not being, and it's not to blame. We're not blaming anybody, but our parents did not have the coping mechanism for their
Right.
own healing to even notice this drastic change in our personalities.
Drastic
I
change.
mean, it seems so obvious to us, but I mean, look at us. We spent the last, 3 years really picking apart this stuff.
Right.
I mean, not even just 3 years. I'm sure it's been a lifetime, but I mean, really in depth in the last little while. Didn't make
Yes.
sense to me either until the conversation we had probably like 4 days ago. So,
Yeah. So that's how I coped. I didn't. I just numbed myself and I disassociated. Those were basically my two coping methods for a good like 10 straight years. And it worked until it didn't, What about you? What
wow.
did
And it's the same thing. Addiction. And it addiction in so many ways. And I know we always think of drugs and alcohol as addiction, but I have an addictive personality and then my
you?
tendencies are very repetitive. And that is why cognitive behavioral therapy worked for me, because I am a creature of habit and I continue to do things and I continue to become addicted to people, situations, places, and especially drugs. And
Mm, mm-hmm.
it was something that started at a very young age. I mean, smoking cigarettes at 10, smoking weed
Wow.
at 11, and then gradually throughout that same thing, we would bring Gatorade in, or not Gatorade, Blue Typhoon in a Gatorade bottle to junior high. And we're
Right.
getting loaded in gym class as if it's Gatorade. And it didn't, to me, it didn't, I don't know that I was necessarily trying to feel like, I didn't feel empty. I was trying to fit in with people because I wanted to feel normal and I
Right.
never felt normal. So,
Yes.
in my mind, like the cool kids are smoking and the cool kids. And at first, I
Mm,
was really scared to try drugs. But as soon as I, finally got through the acid and the ecstasy, I'm always done. I was an
yeah.
e head for years and then cocaine and crack and kind of continued down that path until, the last 3 years. And we're going to get so much more into that
Yes, we
in the next
are.
couple episodes. But thank you for allowing me a moment to share. But it was really just this total escapism or dissociation from actually having to see how I feel. I didn't know what to do. I just, anything and everything that felt good and made me feel good, I was looking for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's so interesting how both of our experiences led us to similar but very different coping strategies. I really wanted to end this podcast on a bit of an up note. I don't know,
Let's do it. We have to, because
pretty,
you guys, we have to.
yes, and so Jackie, I wanted to ask you, what do you know now that you'd love to go back and tell your teenage self?
Well, I will tell you, because I did go back through my meditation to tell my teenage self, you are worth it. You
Oh,
are already enough.
yes,
And
yeah,
that is what she needed to hear. That is what I hugged her and embedded into her mind. And one another thing is that it was really important to me at that time, or now at this time, I gave that message to her, but it's forgiveness. I forgive myself for not knowing I deserved better back then. And I forgive her for, trying all of these things. Like, now I get it. It was trauma. Like, I used to be so hard on myself.
right.
Like, why can't you get it? Why can't you be normal? Why can't this? Why can't that? Like, you are already enough. That's what she needed to know. And that's what she knows
Mhm.
now. Um,
That's
but yeah,
beautiful.
it was quite I say it quickly, but it was quite the crying and quite this
Yeah,
whole, 2-hour event in this really deep meditation. And, there's sometimes you just know you made the connection that you needed to, and you were able to actually, I don't visualize the way everybody does, but I just knew I was there. I was right in the moment. And it was such a profound experience that really lifted my shame, and my sense of
yes.
self-worth immediately was empowered after that moment. It like almost like miraculous healing. And all of a sudden I just knew I deserve better in life.
Yeah,
And my life has been onward and upward since that moment. And
that is so
that's what
beautiful.
thank you.
Yeah, I am definitely a proponent for inner child work, and I actually had a similar, experience of doing an inner child exercise, meditative exercise, where I went back to my teenage self, and what I told her and it took me a long time to be
Mhm.
able to even get her to notice me or get her to trust me, but she did finally. And what I told her was, I am you and you make it. So don't.
Oh, kind of feel like I could cry a little
Yeah,
bit right now. I feel a little emotional,
yeah.
Elizabeth.
And so to all
This
you
was
guys
this
out
was a
there,
day, right?
I know if you're listening, you're gonna make it, guys.
Oh,
You're,
God.
so, you're
I mean,
worth
we're
it.
going to do it together. This is what it's about, guys. We're doing it together. I mean, we're on the journey with you. You are not alone.
No, you're not. So, guys, thank you so much. Woo, that was a heavy one. Thank you for joining us today while we began to lift the veil around the effects of sexual trauma on the teenage and young adult brain, and the beginning discussion of some holistic healing modalities. Know that your comments and perspectives are truly important to us. So reach out if you have any questions for us to explore on our show, or any other questions concerning our podcast. Contact us at sex, drugs, and spirituality podcast@gmail.com.
Friends, if you would like to contact us about any individual client offerings, please go ahead and follow the link below, and be sure to mention that you heard about us on Spotify. We look forward to connecting to our spiritual community at 11:11 every Saturday night on Spotify. We want to explore and integrate the shadow sides of our reality. Until next time, friends, love and light.
Love and light.
Sex, Drugs, and Spirituality Podcast. Elizabeth Maria, Unlimited LLC. And Jackie Lyons of Akashic Energy Healing is not responsible nor liable for any advice, course of treatment, diagnosis, or any other information, services, or products that you obtain through this website.